And when you go to countries that are torn apart by war and you get to a point where you stop people fighting, uh, a lot of people want to rebuild. And some of the first cohorts of people that show up that are really motivated to rebuild are the entrepreneurs. So I did have the privilege of working with, a set of entrepreneurs that would own everything from radio businesses where they would have infrastructure in places like antenna fields or other areas where, we had gone in to quiet things down and sort of take over. So they showed up there and they said, look, we want to get back into business. And when I met these individuals who were all quite remarkable and impressive, I was like, this seems like a really cool thing to do when I leave. And then the second thing that happened is, um, especially in zones of conflict and peace, you start understanding just how important money is and what the role of money is in a market, in a society to build a business. And I realized that that wasn't something that I understood very well, and I'm very curious. So I both wanted to build, and I was curious, and it was all like, all right, let's go leave and build a business. And I left, and it was 2008, right when the mortgage-backed security blow-up happened. Everything fell apart. My timing was brilliant.
You're listening to Forum Founders. We tell stories of immigrant and first-gen entrepreneurs, investors, operators, and ecosystem builders. And on the show, you hear incredible stories that often go untold. Hassan Khan is a second-time fintech founder and co-founder and CEO of TODAQ Micro, a fintech that enables instant micropayments for producers of movies, show, documentaries that want to have a direct-to-consumer, frictionless, pay-as-you-do experience where they can control their customer relationship, control their content, and have better real-time monetization. Prior to building startups, he was a consultant at McKinsey, an Army signals officer for the Canadian Army. I'm really excited to have you on the show. Welcome to Forum Founders, Hassan.
Thank you, Andy. It's a real pleasure to be here.
A good place to start is your early life. How'd you grow up? Where'd you grow up? Tell us all about that.
Yeah, a great question. I mean, I grew up in Toronto, which is actually where I am right now at this minute. And with my parents, my dad was one of the first tech startup people way, way back. So he worked for IBM when I guess it must have been like Facebook at the time. I
The
think it was
hot
after.
startup.
Yeah, I think it was still in the time where they had to wear like a suit and bowler hats, and there was like the I mean, it was like then. And with
Yeah.
a few partners, he left and built his own computer business.
Yeah.
So when I grew up, I was surrounded by mainframes and magnetic tape and punch cards. That was my sandbox.
So you were basically in tech, or like around computers, mainframes, super early, but you didn't end up going to study computer science or anything like that, or did you do that?
Well, I did, but again, it was a roundabout route. I think I have a knack of sometimes making easier, obvious things hard or indirect. I really had a love of history, of geography. I was very curious about the world. So when I first went to university, I took arts. I studied medieval history and all kinds of very interesting things where, you might look at it and say, how exactly does that apply to a job or a career when you leave? But that's where my passion was. But when I was going through all those courses, my interest and my curiosity was always taking me to the places where new technologies and new innovations are produced, and they might change the course of history or change how people live. And at a certain point, I decided, all right, I'm not going to finish my history and economics and political science degree. I'm going to do computer engineering. So after a couple of years, I took a year off and finally did the gap year late. And then I went back, reapplied, and started a computer engineering degree. And I did that with the Royal Military College of Canada, which is like Canada's West Point. And I joined the Army, and that was the start of my military career.
And you were a signals officer. What is that exactly in the Army?
Well, yeah, the good question. The name comes back from the days where I think they were using things like flags and smoke signals and those kind of things. But
Yeah.
signals officers take care of and oversee everything to do with how do you communicate. And that covers satellites, fiber, computing, telephony, electronic warfare, how you secure all those communications with cryptography.
Hmm.
So it's quite broad spread. The kinds of things that I was doing was more at the deployed and pointy end of what the army does when we go to different regions, like the war in Bosnia way back and
Hmm.
things like that. But it was a really good grounding because you get to work with the latest technologies. You have a huge amount of scope and a lot of pressure where whatever you create and deploy, it has to work, and it
Yeah.
has to work in the worst conditions.
Right,
Um,
exactly. It has to be like
so
low signal, low
yeah,
visibility, all that stuff. Like it has to,
correct.
yeah.
And you're absolutely right. And so things like having something that is simple, highly resilient, highly
Hmm.
efficient, replicable, all those things become very important.
Hmm. And so you joined the, I'm based out of US, so I'm just going to say the equivalent to West Point. Were any of your family in the forces? Like why'd you decide that was the path to at least go?
It was a very personal decision. I think at the time I was a pretty wild kid, so having some structure around me, I think that helped. And even to this day, I have a very hard time sitting at a desk and sitting still. So a career that started sitting at a desk, it just wasn't going to work for me. I wanted adventure. I wanted to be pushed. I wanted to do something that mattered, and that led me down the path of the military. But it wasn't unknown to my family. Uh, my family comes from India, Pakistan, Afghanistan. My parents had come to Canada during the 1950s, quite a while back. So uh, that my family on all three sides within all those countries, there was a history of both business, political, government, and military service, right, across all of those. I think it skipped my parents' generation in the large part, but certainly there was a lot of, sort of family memory and kind of history around, people in the family doing those kinds of things.
And so you were at the Canadian Army for several years and you decided to move on to go to McKinsey. What was that experience like? And especially what I'm curious about too is from McKinsey, what drew you into fintech?
I think what drew me out of the army was I had
Yeah.
a great run. When you go to countries that are torn apart by war and you get to a point where you stop people fighting,
Hmm.
uh, a lot of people want to rebuild. And some of the first cohorts of people that show up that are really motivated to rebuild are the entrepreneurs.
Hmm.
So I did have the privilege of working with, a set of entrepreneurs that would own everything from radio businesses, where they would have infrastructure in places like antenna fields or other areas where, we had gone in to quieten things down and sort of take over. So they showed up there and they said, look, we want to get back into business.
Yeah.
And when I met these individuals who were all quite remarkable and impressive, I was like, this seems like a really cool thing to do when I leave. And then the second thing that happened is, um, especially in zones of conflict and peace, you start understanding just how important money is and what the role of money is in a market, in a society to build a business. And I realized that that wasn't something that I understood very well, and I'm very curious. So I both wanted to build, and I was curious, and it was all like, all right, let's go leave and build a business. And I left, and it was 2008, right when the mortgage-backed
Right.
security blowup happened. Everything fell apart. My timing was brilliant. Uh, I explored kind of a few things because I knew I needed just some more training or education because I knew nothing about how does a business work or how do you put a deal together. I had a lot of skills, but stuff like that wasn't part of it. And I know at that point I'd had enough of school. I didn't want to sit at a desk. So I wanted a place to learn where it would be applied knowledge. And there'd be room where I could chart my own course and learn the things that I thought were important, and then hopefully do some good while I was at it. And it was that kind of need that led me to McKinsey. I had some very good mentors who recommended I go look them up, and then started that conversation and ended up there. So McKinsey was never a big long-term goal or something that I'd had, in the plan or in the works for any particular period in time. It was literally, I'd left. I was like, oh, I should try some management consulting. And then someone mentioned that. I just kind of fell into it, a number of months later.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit serendipitous how that transition happened, but it worked out. I'm grateful for that.
It worked out, and it seems like you had a lot of opportunity to essentially explore that itch of money and how it works in different areas, right? So you had you then built your first startup in fintech. Can you tell a little bit about that experience, what you were building, what solutions? Um, yeah.
Of course. And when I was at McKinsey, we were helping clients in industries like finance and technology and healthcare go through digital transformation. In a lot of cases, when a big company wants to do that, they look for innovation where it's happening in small areas with startups and smaller companies. And
Hmm.
in a lot of cases, those startups or smaller companies have something that the giant corporation needs. That's how I started interacting with startups and earlier stage companies.
Hmm.
And one of the things I saw was that for them, getting capital is obviously critical. Obviously, sales, a dollar through sales is the highest quality dollar you can earn.
Hmm.
But after that, investment, especially when they're really small, is important. And that's very hard, and especially in Canada, but it also exists in some other markets. Non-dilutive growth capital. So once you've built the innovation or the tech, and now you're like, we want to commercialize, we want to scale, having that available is hard to get, and especially if you're knowledge based, because you don't have property, plant, equipment you can use as collateral to get a loan. All your value is in software and
Software tied
data,
up in
in
code. Yeah.
patents. It's all
Yep.
these intangible things. So the first fintech I created was designed to address that need. Can you actually build a digitally enabled, like a fintech lender
Hmm.
that can value those intangible assets, not in their equity valuation when everything's rosy. And,
Hmm.
someone stands up and says, my AI company is worth $1 trillion and I want to raise 7 trillion, not naming any names, right?
Yeah.
And, everyone's all happy and it's kind of at the
Everyone's
top
like,
of the
take my
curve.
money.
Yeah, exactly. But for the mass of everybody
Yeah.
else, it's,
Yeah.
well, what is the value of these intangible things when everything has gone wrong?
Hmm.
And maybe all those things aren't worth 100 million, right? Maybe it's
Hmm.
only a couple million, but it's 2 million more credit than a bank or anyone else would give you because they value all that stuff at zero, right? It's all
Yeah.
just goodwill on the balance sheet. So we
Yeah.
built a digital platform that could do that.
And
And from there, yeah.
was the secret sauce the algo basically to basically evaluate all the intangible assets and being able to value those?
So there was one part of it certainly, which was how do you value, using a lot of data and an algorithm, go and
Yeah.
look at an asset like that and value it.
Yeah.
There was a few technologies at the time that did that kind of thing, and we created a partnership with a U.S. company, and for that portion of it, brought it in. And then the next part of it was how do you stitch that into a larger platform that then combines a credit model and a method of lending and origination of loans and sort of bringing the rest and putting it all together.
Hmm.
So there was really sort of two hills to climb.
Hmm.
But after about a year of building, we then went out and we matched our first capital provider with our first borrower, and probably over a period of 4 or 5 years, lent out 30, 40 million. So not too much, but enough to prove the model.
Yeah.
And during that time, I got to learn a lot about money, right? Because um, as a lender, you're taking money from investors, usually in a fund structure, much like a venture capital firm would do it. You're lending it out, you're getting it back, you're paying everyone else out. So you're seeing the whole, stream and flow of money through that. And one of the things that was quite frustrating is it was all full of a lot of friction. It was very complicated and it was very expensive. More so than you would think with having the internet for, around for 30 years and, everything being digital. you ask yourself the following question. So let's say you went somewhere and you paid for a service, and then that business went and paid their supply chain, and maybe that supply chain company paid its supplier, and then or its parts supplier, and then that person went back to the bank, and you said, all right, how long did all of that take, and how much did it cost? So by the time you add the transaction and interchange fees at each hop as the payments are happening, then you add in all the back office costs around billing and invoicing and reconciliation and administration and all that. And then, even now, like today, you've got all these platforms that said, we're going to make it easier for you, right? We'll
Right.
do that and make it seamless. And it helps, but it's still a lot. And suddenly you still end up with, in our day and age, you know, to go three hops with that money is 90 days, 120 days, right? And if you start with $1 over here, just from the administration and the transaction fees, you'll end up with far less than $1 in terms of what's stripped out at every stage on the way. And when we think about it in that way, that's kind of crazy considering we live in a digital, real-time world. And you're like, well, why?
Why is that the
Why can't we
norm?
have better
Exactly.
things?
Right.
Yeah.
And
And
people
then that led
chalk
to
that
my
up.
second startup. Yep.
People chalk that up almost as a cost of business, but it's like it
Yes.
shouldn't be like that in this day and age.
Yes, we're very adaptable and very resilient, and we're
Yeah.
adaptable and resilient as people to the point where something can be really bad and we get
Yeah.
used to it, and then we no longer think about a better day where you might not have to deal with that
I
because
mean, you probably
you
saw
just
that on the
accept.
ground in when you're in the army too.
Yes,
Yeah.
you kind of see that in a number of different circumstances. But
Yeah.
I'm glad you kind of pointed at that because this is where innovation comes from. People have
Hmm.
gotten used to living with something that's suboptimal, and
Yeah.
then someone or a set of people get up and like, we're going to change it.
Yeah. You know what's funny? I had a conversation recently with a startup ecosystem builder in Singapore, and I was just trying to learn as much as possible about the Singaporean startups. And one of the things was, life is so easy in Singapore. So, like, we don't really have that much problem. Like, taxes are, you know, super easy, like collected, all these things. It's global trade. And so that was a really interesting perspective where a lot of the real innovations comes from seeing and experiencing real pain. So I guess this is a good segue into um, you, your second startup. First, I would love to learn more about TODAQ and what you're doing, especially for filmmakers, documentary makers, content creators. Um, and second is, yeah, why do you decide to build that for them?
Sure. Um, so we have right now our first movie from the first studio that is powered by this tech.
Yeah,
There's another 100 movies and shows that'll be going out in the next few months, and there's about 10,000 movies, documentaries, TV shows that are lined up waiting for this. And all this happened within like a month and a half in terms of this entire industry coming. So, what we are doing and who we're serving is the producers and studios and owners of what we'll call tier one movie shows and documentaries. So tier one is you typically sell to Netflix, Peacock, Warner, Disney Plus, and
hmm
then some tier two stuff as well. So like high quality content that there was a full production, post production, all of that. It's not your usual sort of YouTube video, right? It's actual shows, and that market or that constituents, they've been squished for a whole generation by giant platforms like Netflix and everybody else. And the thing that has happened is that creative industry and the storytellers have gotten to a point where they have no negotiating leverage with the big walled garden giant.
yeah,
They get very poor upfront payments, very little revenue share, unless you're Squid Game or something huge. But the
yeah,
vast majority of them don't get that much. You're paid late, like this whole time of how long is it going to take between your Netflix subscription goes in and between when someone sees some revenue share or whatever else. Very little transparency. You don't own the end customer. You don't know anything about them. You don't
yeah,
know whether you were paid fairly. And even if you know that you weren't paid fairly, you don't have any recourse because you're dealing with a giant that's 1,000 times bigger than you. What are you going to do?
Yeah. They have a room full of lawyers basically waiting for that.
Yeah, and this then gets to the point where that whole industry, you could see it like popping off here and there, like with the writer's strike and various things happen.
Hmm.
But people kind of adapted to a really, not a good situation. And
Hmm.
what we did is we showed up and said, hey, we have an end to end solution for you. And you can have a direct to consumer channel where you can control your content, you can own the relationship with your customer, and you can give them something where they have a perfect pay as you go experience. So you don't need to subscribe, you don't need to log in or any of that. You show up to the site, and like out of all the streaming platforms that are out there, you might have one, two, maybe three memberships. But at a certain point, most people are tapped out, and they're like, "I'm just not doing another subscription."
No.
But there's stuff on those other things that you might want or really want to enjoy or to see. And now with us, you can, for that piece of content, you can just show up and in 5 seconds tap. You didn't need to log in or give your data or say you were or get locked in.
Yeah.
And you get like a digital rental pass. And, for 3 days, you can just, or maybe you buy the thing and you own it forever. You can watch and enjoy what you want. So
Yeah.
on the consumer end, it's nice because it's perfect pay as you go. But then it gets even nicer because in that whole money flow we were talking about, if you were paying $3 to rent that movie, there's no transaction fees or interchange charges or anything else. So the platform gets $3. They can turn around in the next second and pay the cast, the crew, the film financing company, the supply chain. There might be 100 payees out of your $3.
Hmm.
Even the lowly audio mixer who spent 10 hours on that movie,
Hmm.
who was doing audio mixing for a couple of scenes, from your
Hmm.
$3, suddenly 2/10 of a penny appear in their wallet.
Yeah, that's first when you talk about 90 days and then 2 seconds, drastic improvement across the board. But I wanted to learn like how does it actually work? So myself, if I go into this website and you, Hassan, owns, let's say, a studio, studio, your studio, Hassan, can basically take all of the content, let's say movies or TV shows, onto a website that you already made. And
Yeah,
then
so
did
what you
they,
can do is two things.
yeah,
The first is you're a studio or a producer or whatever, and you have your content, but you have lots of followers. You can self host it.
okay,
So you can then start plugging your movies and your shows on your own site, and people who show up are monetizing and paying you directly. And the streaming, like everything, is just it's covered within the solution, right? And everyone
yeah,
gets what they want. You're getting paid right away, and you can pay everyone else you want right away too.
cool.
The other thing that's happening is a lot of the studios and producers, particularly in the US, said, well, we're all going to band together and we're going to create our own fair trade Netflix. And we're
Gotcha.
a
Okay.
partner in that too, where our tech is plugged into that as well. And then you have strength in numbers because you have 100 studios that are getting together.
Yeah.
And it's like a shopping mall. And you go into the shopping mall and there's different content, and everyone can decide what their pricing is or what they're going to put on, and they have that control.
Yeah.
But then you've got the strength in numbers for distribution, for marketing, for discoverability, all those kind of things.
Yeah. I've noticed some of the festivals also have those opportunities to basically direct download or directly consume the content that
Yes,
they have on their festivals.
that's right.
That makes sense.
And and then the other thing, by the way, that we allow, which is this is a first, is
Yeah.
ownership and rentals are transferable.
Nice.
So imagine you rented something and you've got this digital pass and you liked it. And you rented and watched it, and it's a 4 day rental, and you have almost 4 days left.
Yeah.
You could, with a tap, by email, the same way you can send money by email now. By email, you send with a tap that rental pass to someone else. You don't have it, the other person have it, and they can show up and with a tap watch the movie.
How do studios feel about that, especially if they can't monetize twice? They monetize once.
So the way that that's being handled is they really like it, and they like it for a few reasons.
Hmm.
Number one, what that does is it increases the total size of the market because you're treating the fan and the viewer right. It's like when in the old days before the internet, you might buy a DVD, right? Or even a VHS cassette.
Yeah.
And if you rented it, you had possession of this thing for 4 days, and it might
Right.
get watched multiple times by you or by others. So we're simply restoring something that should be under your control in the first place.
Hmm.
Then, so the second part, and that increases the size of their market and the customer satisfaction. And it's the same way as an example like Microsoft. And this isn't piracy. This is just you rented it for that period of time and you should
Hmm.
watch it as much as you want. So on the one hand, they get to increase their market. And as a customer, you're happier too. But the other thing we're doing is you can go share it with someone you know, but you might rent the thing and be like, I don't quite know who else wants this because I love, Shakespearean dramas from the 1950s, and I just don't have too many friends who are into what I like. Um, so a digital thrift market is opening up. So with a tap, you can go drop your rental there. So if you paid $4 to rent it for 4 days,
Yeah.
the movie drops on there with a timer going down. So now you have a digital thrift market that operates the same way that Expedia or the hotel sites would work.
Yeah.
And it starts at $3 now, not four, and then counts its way down to 50 seconds because there's only 3 hours left. 50 cents because there's only three
Yeah.
hours left.
It's like
And when whoever
secondary
taps,
market.
yeah, whoever taps
Yeah.
and buys it, the movie producer gets paid, you get paid, and the market gets its little cut.
Yeah.
And now everybody's incentivized.
It's almost making it's almost a counter to, let's say, like a black market too. If a black market, you
Yes,
can't really see what's going on, but the behavior is already happening anyway. If you have a above ground marketplace like that, where you can share assets, the digital assets, um, you're basically making it more transparent down the line, and then everyone hopefully gets a share. That's
correct.
more long term.
Yes.
That's awesome. How I'm Hassan, I'm very curious about this. So your previous startup is kind of different to what you're building with TODAQ right now. What was your journey for product market fit to understanding that the content business was something that you needed to build for?
It's a good question because when we founded TODAQ Micro back in mid 2023, us and our team and our experience was all on the business to business side with critical services. Things that have to work, but it's stuff like, defense, finance, supply chain, energy, all those kind of things, where if it works, you don't really notice. Um, and we were doing a bunch of market testing there for everything from API services, AI to AI, supply chain, etc. And I found when I was doing meetings and pitching, and I literally had this iPad open, the wait staff and hospitality staff at hotel lounge or wherever else were paying close attention to me. And one day I asked this young lady, I was like, "So you're interested in micropayments?" And she said yes, and I thought it would be tips, and she was like, "No, I'm a musician and an actress. I have to do gigs all the time. I can't make a living." And then it clicked. So the entertainment industry found us. And then what happened is, well, the entertainment industry is huge, right? You could do music or books or, more of influencer videos or movies. So there's quite a bit of exploration for a number of months there, even within that space to understand how do we narrow down to this group, which is very, very large, of producers, of studios, everything else. And that was a journey as well. Because a lot of the other places, it was all viable, but it's the usual startup path where you really have to get that laser focus down.
The dollar value is probably completely different than the musicians too. You have so many people in content or movies or TV shows that you are supporting um, that wants to get paid essentially down the line. So you
Yes.
can,
And,
yeah,
and the musicians are part of that
yeah.
because a musician or a band's song or their
Hmm.
riffs or whatever it is can get packed in as soundtrack to a movie
Hmm.
and elsewhere. So they become part of that cast and crew.
Yeah. I have the privilege of having a second time founder. So before TODAQ Micro, um, what was what do you do differently second time around than the first time around?
I think there was a long list of, mistakes that you do as a first time founder. Um, One of which is the second time around, I learned very quickly to put aside some of the wisdom that serves you better when you're at an enterprise level or at a big company level where certain things are delegated and you pass stuff around and do things by committee.
Mhm.
Where very often, there's a lot of truisms about, the first million in sales needs to be done by the co-founders or the CEO, and he needs to do this and this, but it really is true because when you're creating a new product, you're being with a new set of champion customers and really down on the ground, you actually have to get very deep into the nth level of detail with
Mhm.
everything around that customer experience, what the economics are like, everything else, so that you can understand how to get that flywheel starting to move and moving faster and faster.
Mhm.
Then there's a later problem and a question of then how do you transition and let your baby go and bring others in and enable them to get them to grow. But doing that in the beginning, the second time around, I'd like to think that I was better at that end of it.
Mhm.
There was some parts of it that are necessary, but it's unfortunate is kind of the way the world works is that when a startup first appears, there's a whole ecosystem of advisors, support, and this and that, and your sales and whatever, and they just show up. And some of them are fantastic, but most of them are a waste of time. And learning how to say no to things faster
Mhm. Mhm.
and developing the instinct and the pattern recognition for that, that was important. So I learned how to say no better. And I think the second time around, I also learned how to have some more fun.
Okay, that's a huge
Yeah,
difference because you're
yeah,
doing this 24/7, so might as well have fun doing it.
exactly. And
Yeah.
it was to the point exactly as you said. It's like a series of marathons, and so where you and everybody's different. So you
Yeah.
need to understand if you're going to throw everything into the ring, what are the things that are going to give back to you
Mhm.
that give you that energy to keep going. So with me, I'm very product oriented. I'm very people oriented. I like creating and building new things. I like seeing how those new things change the lives of people. So I'll tend to try and surround myself with experiences that are giving that feedback loop. And then over time, you also psychologically learn to welcome and seek out either the negative feedback or it's not working or it needs to be improved. Right. That's another hump to get over.
This is probably a good place to come to last couple questions. But you're in the entertainment industry, so I have to ask you this. What are you watching now? What's something that's on your TV while you're trying
All
to
right.
relax and
So,
have fun?
okay. So here, our first tap powered movie is
Yeah.
coming out next week. It's a great story.
Oh, no
I'm
way.
going to share it with you, but it's just a nice dramedy about this girl who's going through cyberbullying and how she deals with it.
Yeah.
But because I was so deep into the testing, right? Every time there was a new tech feature or this or that happened.
Yeah.
So I ended up having to go through the same starting scene probably 2,000 times.
Right. You're like,
And
I can recite the lines. No problem.
it was quite funny because I still have not had a chance to watch the movie. So when it comes out is going to be the first time I've watched it. So I've watched, the first whatever minute
Yeah.
2,000 times. It was like the movie Groundhog Day with
Yeah.
uh, with Bill Murray.
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. But there is a set of shows coming on where I really like some of the either historical drama or detective or
Hmm.
historically accurate kind of things. But then there's the story around it. So what there was a nationally syndicated TV show from about a dozen years ago called The Pinkertons. I think it was a 20 or 22 part series about the Pinkertons detective agency in the US. So combined detectives and cowboys and, all of that. But that is one of the series that is coming on to this. So I'm looking forward to that. Um, I've always liked sports and the outdoors. There is a feature movie about a character in the extreme sports world.
Okay.
and where Heat went through, like with base jumping, and the movie's kind of called Base. So looking to move that on. So yeah, that's just a couple things that I'm looking forward to.
Amazing. Last question that I always ask founders is what are you optimistic about? I think this is a fun question to ask because starting something from scratch is a very optimistic act, but doing so as immigrant first gen, second gen founders also uh, doing that. So
Um, so I'm optimistic about a couple things, and I don't know if the two things are compatible. I think we've hit something that at least a billion people can benefit from, and I say that without hyperbole.
huge.
The second thing is I'm very optimistic that later this year, um, I and family will have our first holiday in about 5 years.
Incredible. Well,
I
with
can see
that,
daylight.
yeah,
We sometimes laugh about it, right? It's like
yeah,
there's this mythical thing called go take a vacation.
yeah,
Let's see.
yeah.
We're gonna
Let's
try.
see. I'm
Yeah.
hoping for that as well. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much, Hassan, for being on Forum Founders, sharing your experience, sharing TODAQ Micro, and I'm excited for the platform to grow to help a billion and more people basically uh, engage with entertainment and also make a living on their work. So thank you
Thanks
for
so
being on
much,
the show.
Andy. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to sharing that first movie with you.